Choosing to marry Bob was my decision, so even if it was a mistake, the responsibility is mine. But everyone makes mistakes in judgment. My name is Mary, a 33-year-old married woman with a son in elementary school. I'm toiling away at a small to mid-sized company run by my father-in-law Mike and my husband Bob. People say it's rude to say toiling away since I became the wife of a business owner. Even my own parents and friends have scolded me, calling it a luxury. But in reality, I'm being overworked by Mike, Bob, and the company. Originally, I was hired as an office worker. It was the company I was introduced to while looking for a job after graduating from community college. They paid me a salary until I married Bob. But then, wanting me to marry, Mike and Bob made me work without pay after the wedding. Being a small business, most of the staff were either Mike's relatives or Bob's friends. Lots of connections. I was tasked with everything, from administrative work to accounting and general affairs, along with countless other menial tasks. Due to cost-cutting, I was even in charge of cleaning. Jim, a veteran among the staff, taught me the ropes. Jim, a distant relative of Mike, is a kind soul who helps me with my grueling tasks.
I'm sorry I didn't tell you. You were married off to work for free, just like Janet was.
Janet was my mother-in-law, a refined, calm, and kind woman, one of my few allies. According to Jim, Janet was actually Mike's cousin. Her parents decided on a marriage that turned out to be even more challenging than mine. My son Henry is kind-hearted and worries about his mother in these harsh conditions. But Bob, Janet's son, was similar to Mike. Arrogant, blustering, and never sparing a thought for his struggling mother, Janet. A man who doesn't cherish his own mother won't cherish his wife either. In this company, in this home, that kind of justice prevailed. Janet was very kind to me. She helped me, overwhelmed with housework and my job. Mike and Bob piled work on me and then expected me to take care of the household too. When I laid out takeout from the deli due to exhaustion, it caused an outrage. Even when Janet said, "Mary is tired. I will help her," it was to no avail.
You're supposed to devote yourself to me once we're married. Stay out of this.
Janet did her best to support me, but there were limits. After Bob had a son, he stopped paying attention to me. He'd disappear, leaving the house for days on end. Mike did the same. Yet they had the audacity to call me and Janet useless.
A woman who can only bear one child is useless. Henry isn't cute like Mary. Is he really my child?
They don't understand how much their words can hurt someone. My dignity has been shattered repeatedly by Mike and Bob. Since getting married, I've been burdened with various tasks to the point of exhaustion. It was only Janet's support that kept me from collapsing from overwork. With no wages paid, I couldn't afford to buy clothes or even get a proper haircut. Janet would secretly give me an allowance. She also shared her limited wardrobe and jewelry with me. Janet, skilled at sewing, would remake her precious dresses into new ones for me. "I'm sorry this is all I can do for you." The clothes Janet crafted with love were beautiful. Above all, I was grateful for Janet's warm heart. "Thank you, Janet. I can't believe you fixed my favorite dress," I said with tears in my eyes, and Janet just smiled. In her youth, Janet had attended a fashion design school, so she was a whiz with a needle and thread. She confided in me that she never wanted to marry Mike. She knew all too well his arrogant ways, having grown up with him as her cousin. But her parents had arranged it, and she felt she had no choice but to comply. After the wedding, Janet was treated terribly and was deeply unhappy. Even while pregnant, she was overworked by Mike. I was living the same fate. If Janet hadn't been there to help me, working right up until my due date, both my baby and I would have been in danger. Bob, who felt no love for his son Henry, never lifted a finger to help with the baby. And Henry, he never grew attached to his father or grandfather. He saw them as adversaries, witnessing how they treated his mother and grandmother. Henry was always by our side during the tough times. Despite his young age, he was aware that he was the man of the house. This didn't amuse Mike and Bob at all. When Henry showed defiance, Mike and Bob blamed me.
He doesn't respect his grandfather. That's on you and your bad parenting. You're to blame for not educating him right. You're useless.
They'd yell. I was so frustrated I felt like crying. But Henry, as smart as he is, caught on quickly. He knew his father and grandfather were the worst. For a 10-year-old, Henry spoke like an adult. And when it came to defending Janet and me, he was organized and direct in confronting Mike and Bob.
You can't expect blind respect, not for a father or grandfather who don't deserve it. Can't you see that?
Mike and Bob were furious with Henry's words. They scolded him for being insolent, but Henry completely ignored them. Mike tried to win Henry over with a hefty allowance, but it only made Henry despise him more. Bob tried to convince Henry of mine and Janet's incompetence, which backfired. Henry put an end to that by saying,
"It's despicable to insult your wife and mother like that."
In private, Henry urged me to give up.
"Mom, just get a divorce. Staying in this house is only making us miserable."
He was right, but it was impossible for me. I had cried to my parents about how hard my life was, but they just scolded me for not being patient enough and being ungrateful to a relatively wealthy husband. So even if I divorced, I couldn't rely on my parents' home. And for a 33-year-old woman capable of only clerical and menial tasks, there was no hope. Above all, if I divorced, I risked losing custody of Henry, the heir to the company. If I left, Janet would be stuck in that house alone. I could never abandon kind-hearted Janet. So I endured Mike and Bob's treatment and kept on living. Henry and Janet watched me grow more worn out each day, worried sick about me. The only kind person at the company, Jim, had to quit. His wife fell seriously ill and needed his care. Mike forced him out, deciding that his situation was a liability to the work. It was ruthless how quickly Mike discarded Jim after years of loyal service to the company. Jim retired with only a modest pension and left, used up and then discarded when no longer needed. The atmosphere at the company grew even more uncomfortable without him. Exhausted, I began to lose my sense of purpose in life. It was then that a turning point arrived. It was time for Henry's school open day and the parent-teacher meeting. During the class observation, Henry was solving math problems with evident joy. Other parents looked on admiringly at his intelligence. Though he's the son of Bob and me, Henry has exceptional talents. A mother sitting next to me whispered, "You're Henry's mom, right? My son and Henry are good friends." As I managed a weary smile, the woman's face fell with concern. Worried I had offended her, another parent, a man, suggested in a low voice,
"You look pale. It might be best to sit and join us."
The teacher nodded with a smile at his suggestion. Resting on an available chair, I continued to watch over Henry. Henry kept glancing my way. All of Henry's classmates' parents were kind. The kindness of the other parents was a rarity for me, except from Henry and Janet. After the class, there was a parent-teacher meeting. I was surprised to see not only mothers, but also fathers in attendance. Mike and Bob always declared that parenting was the mother's duty. My parents had similar views. But the reality is that parenting requires mutual support. There was a simple round of introductions among the parents that day. Everyone introduced themselves with a warm smile. When it came my turn to introduce myself, I nearly fainted as I stood up. The man who had offered me a seat earlier suggested I remain seated. He was the same parent who had been considerate during the class.
"I'm a doctor. I took the day off from the hospital to be here," he said.
After observing me for a moment, he concluded it was clear I was suffering from overwork.
"You're sleep-deprived and not eating well. You need rest."
At his words, I couldn't help but break down crying. When I saw it was impossible for me to rest, the teacher, who had been silent, spoke up.
"Henry has been consulting me for a while. Today, we're changing the agenda of this meeting."
All the parents readily agreed. Henry's homeroom teacher had been consulting with Henry for some time. The teacher had been listening to Henry's concerns about Mike and Bob's arrogant behavior. Henry always mentioned how they treated me and Janet terribly. He said we had to act fast, or things would get worse for Janet and me. Henry had been open with the teacher about our home situation. The teacher believed Henry and wanted to help. but as a teacher, he couldn't recklessly interfere in family matters. However, seeing my current state, the teacher decided immediate action was necessary.
I apologize for intervening in your private matters, but Henry is asking for help. We can't overlook a situation that threatens a child's happiness.
The parents, including the doctor, concurred. Speaking on behalf of everyone, the doctor asked me,
Please tell us what you can about your troubles. There's always something we can do to help.
I slowly began to reveal the hardships I've faced since getting married. Working tirelessly at the company, being expected to do perfect housework, and facing verbal abuse if I ever took a rest. The only allies I had were Henry and Janet, and I couldn't rely on my family. The teacher and other parents lost their words upon realizing the extent of the tragedy. As I explained, I started to cry. A woman nearby, noticing I was struggling, kindly handed me a handkerchief. She was the mother of Henry's friend and expressed her son's fondness for him. Seeing me in tears, she gently rubbed my back. And though her encouragement was firm, she asked decisively, "You've endured a lot, but crying alone won't solve anything, Mary. What do you want to do? Please tell me exactly what you're thinking." Choked up with tears, I confessed my true feelings. "I want a divorce. I can't stand to endure anymore. Life is just too hard," I exclaimed, wanting to take Janet and leave home. The woman quietly nodded and pulled out her business card. It read law office. She and her husband both worked as attorneys. Her son had noticed something was off with Henry and had discussed it with his parents. Henry's friends had sensed that his home life was not all right. "You can consult me through a message. I'll teach you how to keep it from your husband, and it's free. Consider it my meddling," she said firmly with a lively smile. The watching parents also cheered me on. With Henry's help, I realized I had gathered many allies. Thanks to Henry's help, I have made many allies. I decided to divorce so as not to worry my son anymore. From then on, I slowly started preparing for divorce. When I told Henry, he said he would stick with me. I also informed Janet about the divorce preparations. Janet agreed eagerly and dropped a bombshell of her own. "I'm getting a divorce too. Without Mary and Henry, I have no attachment to this house." And so, Janet and I moved forward with our divorce preparations together. As for custody, the scales were overwhelmingly in my favor. According to Henry's friend's parent, even if Bob had financial means, his lack of involvement in parenting made him unsuitable to nurture. I could demand child support and live with Henry. But even if I could claim compensation, I still needed to work. Without a certain level of financial stability, I would be deemed unfit for childcare. Having time to care for a child was also crucial. Long hours of neglect would naturally work against me. Considering this, I was searching for a job. Both Janet and I had every right to claim compensation for our divorce. Years of unpaid labor, verbal attacks wounding spousal dignity, and the ultimate betrayal by our spouses. Mike and Bob had both mistaken their wives' compliance. They had no idea they were grasping at their greatest vulnerability. Janet and I were energetically preparing for our divorces. Divorce preparations are said to be exhausting, but we were moving forward with joy. I hadn't felt this happy since before I got married. Janet and I were deciding on the time to declare our divorces. Mike's business was shaking. Failure seemed certain. With the company's cash flow tight, Mike and Bob were getting irritated. And I had a source feeding me information. Jim, who was ousted after his wife fell ill. He cared for his sick wife while working for another company. Jim was bitter about being deemed expendable and pushed out of the company. That's when he switched to a job where he could work behind the scenes to bring about its downfall. Basically, it was a company that lent money. Mike must have been struggling with finances since he took out a loan from Jim's company. Jim kept me updated every step of the way. Mike couldn't see through Jim's intentions. He didn't realize that taking a loan here meant huge interest would pile up.
"Looks like bankruptcy is on the horizon. The debt is substantial. There's no way he can pay the settlement."
"We'll collect without mercy. Feel free to exploit Mike and Bob as you wish." Then the day we had been waiting for arrived. Mike's company went bankrupt. All the other employees had been warned by me in advance and had fled. Only Mike and Bob were left, abandoned. Seeing Mike and Bob burdened with debt and despair was exhilarating. Janet seemed to feel the same. Her smile said it all. Janet and I whipped Bob's despair further into frenzy. "We're getting a divorce. Yes, sign these divorce papers." "Me too. I'm divorcing as well. Please take care of this." Mike and Bob were shocked by our simultaneous divorce filings. Janet and I had been waiting for this moment. We could finally retaliate when those who tormented us were at their most miserable. Mike and Bob started to rage about our actions on their own. "You're abandoning us." "Of course. You never saw me as your wife, did you?" Just as Mike and Bob were about to shout back, Janet chimed in seamlessly. "And you've been having affairs, right? I know about it. Idiot men." Usually poised, Janet's remarks left Mike and Bob speechless. Janet and I unleashed all our pent-up frustration, resentment, and anger on Mike and Bob. Then we made them sign the divorce papers and said mercilessly, "You'll pay the compensation and child support, even with the debt. Janet, Henry is waiting. Let's go." "Yes, goodbye. Strangers now." Mike and Bob stood there dumbfounded as Janet and I left them behind, divorced. Now a single mother, I live with Henry and Janet. I was working at a job recommended by a lawyer who was a mom friend who helped us, while aiming for a certification at the law firm. I work full-time, and Janet helps me with household chores and childcare. But that's not all. Janet also makes use of her sewing skills working from home. She does dress alterations, which have been very well received. My son Henry has been doing well since the divorce. He plays happily with his friends. My parents have apologized since the divorce. They were sorry for not realizing how hard things were for me. They asked me to come back and live at home, but I refused. I didn't see my parents as allies. It was more enjoyable living just with Henry and Janet. In my experience, parents are not always on your side. I learned not to have expectations. The ones who reached out to me, aside from Henry and Janet, were not my relatives. Henry's teachers and all the parents gathered together. Those who could have ignored us stepped in to help. Without their efforts, Janet and I would still be in dire straits. I'm truly grateful from the bottom of my heart. Mike and Bob were chased by debts. Jim was cheerfully collecting. Thanks to him, the compensation and child support are being deposited without fail. On a day off, I had tea with some of Henry's classmates' parents who had been kind to us. It was then that one of the moms shared the news. Mike collapsed under the weight of his debts. Bob planned to skip town to avoid his debts, but he was stopped. Now he's working hard labor on a big ship, Jim's referral. I don't know the specifics of the job, but I thought, let him work all he likes, and I hope Mike suffers as much as possible. When I got home and told Janet about Mike and Bob's situation, she laughed. With Henry not around, we laughed without reservation. I can't wait to claim the next compensation payment. Janet, relentless, demanded the compensation even after hearing Mike had collapsed. I'm busy working as a judicial scrivener after getting my qualification. Henry thinks I'm cool. Mike, evidently exhausted, said he wants to see his grandson. That's up to Henry, so I asked him if he wanted to meet Mike. Innocently, Henry smiled and said, "I'll go visit." Jim took Henry to see Mike on behalf of Janet and me. Henry returned home without incident, but the next day Mike passed away. None of us, not I, Henry, or Janet, attended the funeral. It was doubtful there were any attendees. Out of distant kinship, Jim took care of the burial and all. When I called to thank him, Jim responded kindly. "My wife has settled down too. Sorry for the worry." When I replied, "That's good," Jim chuckled a bit. Jim praised Henry for being great when he went to see Mike. I believe kind Henry had cheered up bedridden Mike. Mike must have been content to see his grandson one last time. Janet and I had believed that for years. But the truth came out when Henry went to high school. Jim had kept a secret. There was no direct evidence linking Henry to Mike's situation. Henry is a bright boy. He's kind and treasures Janet and me greatly. But he had been dealing punishment to Mike, who had treated him so poorly. Not physically, but psychologically. Henry smiled as he plunged debt-ridden Mike into the depths of despair. With a smile, Henry innocently joked,
"That ship has capsized."
That was a complete lie. Bob is still on a ship paying off his debts. Years later, I scolded Henry, telling him lies are not okay. He swore to never say it again. Obeying our instructions, Henry no longer tells lies that cause despair. Yet he absolutely refuses to meet his father, Bob. For Bob, the greatest misery isn't the divorce or debts, but being seen as sunk by his own son. But fortunately, he hasn't sunk, so I continue to demand child support.